Minister, very good evening to you. Thank you for your time. So 150 million rand is what you had announced at the end of March. How much of that has been spent and where has it been spent?
Well, we did report to this station yesterday, or the day before yesterday, that we are moving on fast with the process of implementing the relief. We promised that would be appointing the adjudication teams, which we have appointed, and they have started work, particularly from the side of sport. There is a report which is ready now for some of the people who get the relief. From the side of arts and culture, we finalized the adjudication committee. It's going to start its work tomorrow.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, no money has been given to any artists or athletes at this point?
No money has been given. Remember that you'll have to follow the process, the supply chain management process of government. But what we are trying to do is to fast-track that process. But you still have to advertise for people and so on. So the applications came in last week, are being sorted out as we speak. And from that point, you then have to roll out after the independent adjudication process would have done its work. As I say, that we should tomorrow be reporting some of the people who have gone through the process of adjudication committee and would be in line for the relief, as it were.
And one of the things that you are requiring of people, at least when you announced the initial requirements, was that artists and athletes who do apply for this COVID-19 relief fund would have to produce some proof. Just on artists alone, they would have to produce proof that they had been contracted to do some work. But that becomes difficult in an industry where often people start with verbal agreements for work that lies, for instance, in May, and you have a conversation in February that you would be contracted to do that work. So how are you going to get around that?
Well, you see, you would know that the fiscus and how it's managed under the Auditor General, the word of mouth does not work. Because what you are doing, you'll have to account for each and every cent which is going to be spent on this. That's why we made it clear that there has to be agreements, MOAs, and by the way, people do get into agreements even in this industry. And those who have applied have gone through that process.
How do you decide, Minister, who gets how much?
Well, Tembekile, what we said in the criteria is that it will depend on the resources, how much the resources we have. As we know, it's 150 million rands, and how many people have applied. As you know, that we were targeting mostly the poorest or in our social ladder, as it were. And we are thinking of something like having a flat rate that, depending on how the adjudication committee would have judged you and your work. But whatever we give out for one person or one group, it can't be anything more than 20,000 rands. So 20,000 rand would be the cap of everything. But also, as I say, it will depend whether you are worth that 20,000 rands in what you are doing.
So this 20,000 rand, is that the agreed cap?
Well, it's a cap based on what is there in the department. Remember, it's a relief. So we are trying to share the cake and slices of the cake to as many people as possible, so that we reach to those who are really needy and who need assistance, as it were.
Is this tax-free money, Minister?
Well, what we said is that we have a particular situation, a situation where there is a disaster. We would have preferred it to be a tax-free, we've engaged with the people responsible for that, but it's up to them. Indications are that it will be taxed.
So it will be taxed. And I'm wondering then, when the payouts do begin, let's say I come forward and I qualify, I meet the tax criteria, I've got the contract of work that I was supposed to do in the next month and the like. Do you pay me out as a once-off payment, or are you able to keep me going as an artist or athlete from month to month?
What is going to happen here, Tembekile, is that the team, the adjudicating team, within the team itself, or the teams, you have people who are dealing with the disbursement of money, the funds from government. And as they finalize the process, they will look into how are they going to be dispersing. But they are guided by one thing from our side, that let us try as much as possible and as quick as possible to ensure that people get their money, so that they are able within this period to use it for whatever they would want to, because they definitely and desperately need their relief.
The other issue, though, Minister, that people have raised about the plight of artists, many of them freelancers at this point, is that we've still got the Performance Protection Amendment Bill. That's been with the President for about 2 years or so. It hasn't been signed into law. One of the things that it would have sought to do would be to protect artists contractually, make sure that they have stronger agreements in place. It would also seek to make sure that artists are paid, for instance, for programs that are repeated even during this time when they're not necessarily going on to set. Would you agree then tonight that the failure by the government that you are part of at this stage to make sure that that bill is passed has led to artists being further compromised, essentially?
Well, it's not a failure, Tembekile. It's not a failure, because remember that the process started until where it is now with the President. So the lawmakers, which President is part of, have been part of the process. But remember, for any law to be signed or to be acceded to, a lot of things have to be done. The President actually must satisfy himself that it is within the law, whatever lawmakers have made, it is constitutional, it will stand the constitutional muster, and so on. So as far as I know, the President has consulted the legal people and so on. Now there was COVID-19, but I know that the President has satisfied himself, and at some point he will then be able to share with the public. And remember that it's not about the failure, it's about the pieces of legislation themselves. These are fundamental, transformatory pieces of legislation. There are issues which people are raising with them, but as I say, fundamentally, they are going to make the situation within the creative sector much better.
But I hear you, Minister, and I'm only jumping in here because we're pressed for time. You say it's not about a failure, but for an artist listening to you and I have this conversation today who doesn't know where April's rent is going to come from, it feels very much like a failure when they've been pleading and begging for this legislation, yes, even though there are concerns raised, to be passed quite timelessly, especially in an industry where your department often has to send out messages of condolences to artists who die paupers. Yet here we sit in 2020 with a pandemic, and there is still no real legislation in place to protect people in sport and the performing arts.
Well, remember that these are pieces of legislation which are being amended, two of them. One is the 1967 piece of legislation. The other is 1978. Now, from the point of view of lawmakers and the public representatives, work has been done. Yes, it has not been passed yet as we speak, but at any time, the President is going to make his views known about what is happening, what is important. And I sympathize with the situation that the situation of the creatives are precarious. It's precisely the reason why we felt that we needed to push for these pieces of legislation to be passed.
But do you understand that, final question then, on that note, why, given that context, so many people in the performing arts are so uninspired by your office as a department that is supposed to look out for their very best?
Well, people would have their views, but as I say to you, the piece of legislation, remember that these two pieces of legislation, the principal department of these pieces of legislation is trade and industry. We made sure that we are part and parcel of all the processes of them reaching the point, because the president's is the last point. So everything has been done to ensure that these two pieces of legislation see the light of the day.
How hard are you as Minister of Arts and Culture pushing to make sure that the legislation does indeed see the light of day before we face another situation where artists at a mass level are sitting with no idea how they're going to put bread on the table?
I think I've explained, Tembegile. I've explained what Parliament did. Two houses of Parliament, starting with the portfolio committees, with the consultation with the public, go to the House of Parliament, which is the National Assembly. Go through the process, it's passed by members of Parliament, go to the House, the second House of Parliament, which is the NCOP, it gets passed there, and right now it's at the tail end of everything. There's nothing at this point Parliament can do, but it would be folly for anybody to want the president to fall into a trap of just passing off, just rushing. He has to consider, and that's what the president is doing.
Mm-hmm. And just a recap then on our initial conversation, you said the adjudication committee that's working on the COVID-19 relief fund for athletes, their trainers and performers starts its work tomorrow. Is that right?
For the athletes, they've started their work. By tomorrow, they'll be giving us the preliminary results of the work they are doing. So they've started with the work. Tomorrow, the ones who are going to be starting from the side of arts and culture, because these two panels are not the same. The one from sport is much smaller because with the applications coming in, people who had more applications are from arts and culture. So I've been putting together this adjudication committee. It's there now, it's appointed, so it's starting its work tomorrow to actually try and cover the ground which has been covered by the sports side.
All right, Sport, Arts and Culture Minister Nathi Mthethwa, thank you so much for your time tonight, sir.